hit the country. The giant storm first struck Queensland, but its tail is being felt thousands of kilometres away in the southern state of Victoria. Wild storms lashed the city of Melbourne, bringing destructive winds and flash flooding. More than 175 millimetres of rain fell in just a few hours, also inundating rural areas. 3 Pakistani cricketers have been banned for a minimum of 5 years after being found guilty of corruption following a hearing in Doha. Salman Butt, Mohammad Asif and Mohammad Amir were charged with conspiring to bowl no balls during a test match against England last year. Rahul Pathak reports.
Well, there were chaotic, almost jubilant scenes outside the Qatar Financial Centre as the 3 players involved attempted to leave earlier today following Saturday's decision. All 3 players essentially have been banned for 5 years each, but there's a real feeling here that the punishment handed down by Michael Beloff QC and his 2 colleagues could have been a lot more harsh.
The tribunal has recommended to the ICC certain changes to the code with a view to providing flexibility in relation to minimum sentences in exceptional circumstances.
Well, as for the players themselves, all 3 are said to be very disappointed with the decision, and Mohammad Amir, for one, has confirmed that he will instruct his lawyers to go ahead with an appeal. That will be heard by the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Well, the next big date for the players is March the 17th. That's when they'll appear before Westminster magistrates in London. They'll be accused of accepting and obtaining corrupt payments. Now, that carries a maximum jail term of 7 years, an extremely serious charge there. But as for the International Cricket Council, well, does this punishment that was handed out today really send out the strong message that they were looking for at the beginning of this tribunal? Well, I think the jury's still very much out on that. Rahul Pathak, Al Jazeera, Doha.
Tens of thousands of Serbs gathered in central Belgrade earlier for the biggest anti-government rally seen there in years. The protest was headed by the Serbian Progressive Party, a centre-right organisation formed from the Serbian Radical Party. Protesters are calling for early elections, higher wages and a crackdown on corruption. And finally, 87 years after his death, Russian communist leader Vladimir Lenin will be buried. His embalmed body has been on display in Moscow's Red Square since 1924. Neve Barker has more from the Russian capital.
Red Square, the heart of Russia, a venue for rock concerts, fashion shows and in the winter months a giant ice rink. But at this heart is also a graveyard where the great and good of the Soviet Union are buried. But no tomb is greater or grander than that of Vladimir Lenin. Shortly after his death, Lenin's embalmed body was brought here to lie in state forever. But this year, 87 years after the revolutionary leader died, a poll was held. 70% of respondents said it was time for Lenin to go. Opponents of the mausoleum have described its presence here as an absurdity. There have also been some strong words from religious groups. The Council of Muslims said the mummified body should be turned over to the communists for pagan worship, while the communists have described those who want to evict Lenin as tribal homegrown pygmies. Emotions are running high.
All these pyramids and mummies, they're ridiculous. Russia is an Orthodox country.
We must always remember him. If we bury him, we'll forget about him too quickly.
Whatever the outcome, the little red pyramid will remain. There's talk of turning it into a museum. Most experts agree that what's inside there is not Lenin's real body. Only about 10% of it's left, the rest removed a long time ago. Still, at the expense of Russian taxpayers, embalmists regularly take the body away for a touch-up. Well, the big question is, what did Lenin want? Historians say that he wanted to be buried alongside his mother in St. Petersburg. Well, the Kremlin haven't given their opinion on the matter, but many people here in Russia believe that now is the time to say goodbye to Lenin. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Well, that's it from me. Darren Jordan will be here at the top of the hour, but for now, we'll leave you with some of the images from the last 24 hours in Egypt.
Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, the economic battle for Egypt. As Cairo and its people come under attack, we explore life under President Mubarak's regime, the numbers and the analysis. Also, the knock-on effect as one of the world's important oil routes comes under pressure and the price per barrel rockets. And can Israel's economy weather the battle for its closest Middle East ally? So welcome to a special edition of Counting the Cost, looking exclusively at what's become known as the battle for Egypt. We're not in our usual studio this week because, quite frankly, the story's been front and centre of Al Jazeera's news agenda for the best part of 2 weeks, meaning a lot of changes to how we've been operating. But still, we are here looking at not just the economic impact of the violence in Egypt, but its economic beginnings. Here is Egypt by the numbers, which goes some way to explaining what triggered these unprecedented protests in the first place. The headline is that Egypt is the third biggest economy in the Middle East. It is worth $188 billion. Ahead of it, the biggest economy, Saudi Arabia, around $370 billion, and the United Arab Emirates at 260 odd. However, Egypt is the most populous nation in the Middle East. It has more than double the number of people in, for example, Algeria. After that, you've got Morocco. Iraq is next on the list as well, population-wise, and Saudi Arabia. So you start to see the discrepancies, don't you? A country with the most people, but not the biggest economy to serve them. And the problems do go further than that. Right, here's a rundown of Egypt's specific problems. Unemployment, first of all. The World Bank says when President Hosni Mubarak came to power, unemployment was running at about 5.4%. There it is. But look at how it's gone since then. It rose to a high of 11.3% by 1995, dropped back a bit, 8.7% by 2008. But you see the bump again at the end there, and the IMF numbers tell the story there. 2009 unemployment was at 9%. Last year it was at 9.2%. The problem is most acute with the young. Male youth unemployment is the key area, says the World Bank. This is ages 15 to 24. It's been rising. It was 15.8% back in 1998 and then trending upwards ever since 23.3% by 2005. So, how do you absorb the growing number of unemployed? Well, the economy apparently needs to expand at a rate of 7% for that to happen. Government says that, but this is the actual performance of Egypt's economy. And you see only 2 years, 2007 and 2008, only twice did it actually hit that mark of 7% growth. So that's your unemployment picture. Poverty, that's a whole other issue. Again, the World Bank numbers show the percentage of people living on less than $2 a day is at 18.4%. And $2 doesn't get you much when inflation looks like that. Look at that. It's anywhere above 7.5%, 8% and trending upwards the entire time between 2008 and 2011. And perhaps ironically, this pyramid diagram illustrates best how income and consumption is spread amongst the population. That's the bottom 20% of the population, which has 9% of the income. Look at the top 20%, 41.5% of Egypt's income. And get this too, President Hosni Mubarak and his family have amassed personal wealth of at least $40 billion. So you see the cold hard facts. A lot of Egyptians don't see much of the country's wealth, a lot don't have jobs, while a small elite seems to share in all the spoils. Let's start with our analysis for this week. George Abbott is the Senior Counsellor and Director at the Institute of International Finance. He is also a former Deputy Director of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department. And I spoke to him earlier in the week from Washington, D.C.
Let me start with the economic, being an economist. One is that for a number of years, Egypt was not growing really fast enough to generate employment, especially for the young. Number two, corruption around the established ruling party and those connected to the party became very visible and alienating for much of the population, while at the same time poverty continued to be quite widespread. Something like 43% of the